Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Martin, and I am excited that we are kicking off the John E. Martin Mental Health Care Challenge. I'd be remiss if I didn't go and give a shout out to the student chairs and team in this room before we get things kicked off. So can I ask you guys to stand up for a brief second and get your applause? We have a fantastic evening planned for you, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who's very, very important to this school, Dean Harrison. Dean Harrison is renowned as an economist who has dedicated her career to creating inclusive and sustainable policies in development, economics, international trade, global labor markets, and now in higher education. She's also been very supportive of our efforts to create awareness of mental health care related issues, and is helping us to go and strive to improve the quality of and access to mental health care for all. So without one more second being wasted, Ann Harrison.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's such an honor to be here for this really important event. And Michael, thank you so much for all the work that you have done to make this happen. We couldn't have had this and tomorrow without Michael, so we should give him a round of applause. So now it's my privilege to introduce today's speaker and Haas alum, go Bears, BS05 Karan Singh. Karan co-founded Ginger, the world's first mental health technology platform, in 2011. By combining high-quality human care with data science and augmented intelligence, the team at Ginger created an entirely new platform for the delivery of mental health care on demand. As COO, Karan has led Ginger's reach to over 25 million people in more than 50 countries in the world. In 2021, Headspace, dedicated to science-backed meditation and mindfulness tools, joined forces with Ginger to form Headspace Health, forming the world's most comprehensive and accessible mental health care platform. Karan currently serves as COO of Headspace Health, which touches nearly 100 million people worldwide. Karan is a leader in the digital health community, serving as a scholar at the Aspen Institute and delivering keynotes at the Public Health Institute and the National Institute of Mental Health. Ginger has received numerous recognitions, including by the World Economic Forum as a technology pioneer and by Fast Company as one of the most innovative companies in healthcare. Karan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We are really grateful to have you back here on the campus, and we look forward to a lively and informative discussion on a really, really important topic. So I'm now going to turn it over to our fabulous MBA students, Matthias Loesch and Madhu Gupta, and they will moderate today's discussion. Take it away.
Well, is it working? Okay. Karan, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you here with us tonight. I also like to thank our audience for taking some time to hear more about Karan's career and also the mental health care industry. I think it's really important. My name is Matheus, as Dean Harrison said. I'm a second year MBA, class of 2023, and I'll be moderating this panel along with
Madhu Gupta. I'm a first year MBA, class of 2024, and I'm very excited to talk about all things mental health with you tonight.
Okay, let's jump in for the first question. So, Karan, I'd love to start this conversation with learning more about you. We have to tell me about yourself here, that you must have trained a lot as well. So, who is Karan? Can you please tell me a little bit more about like your journey, education, family, your inspirations, and also, like we can leave this aside, what prompts you to take the leap and risk of founding Ginger?
Sure, happy to. And Dean Harrison and Michael, thank you again for this opportunity. This is a full circle moment. I was sharing with my wife, who is also an undergrad from Cal and came back for her PhD in the School of Public Health, that this is pretty special. I mean, to have a entire event dedicated to mental health care and mental health innovation. I mean, it really takes this room and countless others like this to really solve this challenge. So, you know, while the accolades are wonderful, they're really still a drop in the bucket when it comes to just how much access and how much need there is in the world. So happy to start at the very beginning and be as real as we can through this. I was very, very beginning, born in Malaysia. My parents moved to Cleveland, Ohio when I was about 2. I came out to the Bay Area when I was about 10, and I came to Cal. And I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew I wanted to do something with purpose, and I had this vague notion of what that meant. And I never realized, actually, that I think business could be a vehicle for that. And so I think, like most people who don't know what they want to do when they grow up, I got into consulting. Because I wanted to keep learning, and I wanted to keep solving what I thought was tough problems. And so, you know, I spent a few years, close to 5 years actually, doing that. And now, about 13 years ago, had a personal brush with mental health, like I'm sure many people in this room. I was on the other end of a phone call after a loved one who had tried to take their own life. And you know, I've always thought of myself as a good read on people and a good judge of character, and you know, I had no idea, like, at all. And you know, I realized in a lot of communities of color, especially my family's originally from India, mental health is just the no-go zone. It's the topic that just no one talks about. And I realized when I look back at that time that, you know, it's actually something we didn't talk about. So that was the spark for me that kind of eventually set me on the path to founding Ginger.
Makes sense. And like also speaking a little bit about your consulting career a little bit. You've been like 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, in consulting, working for ZS Associates Consulting. And like, what made you, there are many folks here that stop their career to take their MBAs. And what made you like, what prompted you to pivot from a career into an MBA? And following up on that, when you embark into the MBA journey, was becoming a founder already like a dream goal of yours?
Was being a founder a dream goal? Yeah, I want to say that it was, but no. No. I think maybe I'll go backwards. I'll start with that, and we can talk about consulting. You know, I had this brush with mental health, right? And then the deeper I dug, the more I realized that you know, teammates at work were experiencing stress and burnout, that people in my family directly, that I was at times, you know, going through what I thought were just these ups and downs, but was, you know, real meaningful stress or anxiety at times. And so I went back to school with the idea that I wanted to create the space to try to think about and do something here. And I didn't really know what it was going to look like. I actually didn't have an intention of starting a company. I had wanted to actually try to tackle this problem, you know, having grown up in the Bay Area, having seen the rise of technology and kind of the impact it could have, thinking about how technology could play a role in mental health. And, you know, at the time, there was really just a couple of use cases for technology. There was, you know, biotechnology, there was EMRs and medical records, and then there was, you know, everything else, right? There wasn't really a digital health ecosystem. There wasn't, you know, care delivery innovation or thinking about new ways of actually scaling access to care. And so I went back to school in a dual degree program between Harvard and MIT, really focused on this intersection of health science and technology. And I just kept bugging everybody I could find and asking them, you know, what they knew about mental health and the different applications for technology in mental health. And I kind of stumbled into sort of the original kind of founding of Ginger. And when I look back and I give, advice to entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting a company, I usually say, don't do it. I really don't do it unless you just can't shake it. Like this idea of founder market fit, or the idea that like you really can't not solve this problem, was, I think, probably most prominent for me. And that's ultimately why I decided that, because I didn't see anything else out there, that I needed to solve it. I think the world has changed quite a bit. The fact that, again, we have this room with these many people, that there might actually be things out there that don't necessarily require you to start a company that you can actually still have impact with.
Thanks for sharing, Karan. That was really insightful. Speaking of school, we know that your team at the MIT Media Lab was pivotal in the founding of Ginger. We have many aspiring entrepreneurs here today, and similar to MIT, Haas has a variety of different entrepreneurship-focused programs and resources. You touched upon this a little bit, but just going a step further, what are the types of resources that you would recommend that folks here in the room take advantage of during their MBA program?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. I think there's a lot of great opportunities at a place like Cal. I think one of the things I learned was just how important innovation happens at these intersection of these disciplines, of people who wouldn't have historically gotten together, that start to have a conversation around a problem and look at it from different angles. And so, just as a starting point, being engaged in these sorts of activities, but just as importantly, also getting out of Haas and getting into the rest of the community, or bringing others into Haas and thinking about, how can other people solve this problem, right? Like, one of my favorite examples was, I would go to a course. Actually, we didn't have a course on sales, like sales training and just negotiations, and they actually implemented one in my second year in business school, and I loved going to those courses and then taking that and trying to apply it to an explicit problem. So at the time we had just founded Ginger, and so I was finding myself kind of in class learning about how to influence people, learning about how to build a balance sheet, learning about these sort of business fundamentals, and then applying that to the startup. The thing that I didn't learn, that I wish I had learned, was the importance of founder mental health, the importance of actually taking care of yourself while you're going through that journey. I think at the time, and even still now to some degree, most people and many founders actually burn out in their first few years because they actually don't take care of their own mental health through that. And so that was a huge lesson for me.
Yeah, and that's definitely, I think we're all, I think I speak for everyone in this room when I say we're all navigating similar experiences, and hearing sort of your experience going through all of that is very helpful. And that's a great segue actually to my next question, which is around, in the spirit of getting to know you a little bit more, and we are here to talk about mental health. I can go first. Personally, for me, I was just telling Karan a little bit ago, but my prior employer was contracted with Ginger, and so Ginger and their mental health resources has been my best friend for the past 4 years, and especially during the pandemic when the mental health challenges became a lot more real for a lot of people, such as burnout, which you just talked about. And so I'm curious, Karan, what are the types of things and practices that you engage in to prioritize your own mental health, and especially in a very turbulent time like this, and let alone for a founder, what are the types of things that keep you going?
Yeah, I've developed a routine now. I didn't have that while I was in school, and so actually, if we can rewind back to the question, and then we can kind of get to what I do now, because I think in business school I found that not enough people, or maybe not even business school, but in graduate school, not enough people were real, were just authentic, were honest and open, and knew what they wanted. They knew what other people thought they were supposed to do. And as a result, they pursued things that actually didn't give them happiness. And I think I was in that camp too. Like, I don't think I fully understood, and it's taken me this journey over the last decade now to really understand that. And, so tangibly what that means now in terms of self-care, it's, I meditate. I've been a long time Headspace user actually prior to the merger. And so that was a nice, again, full circle moment. So I meditate regularly, and for me, my practice is it's a 5-minute walk. And I'll just walk around the house or walk around the block or walk in nature in some way and meditate. And that just reset in the morning has been incredibly helpful for me. The second is I have a group that I get together with about once a month. And we have this, it started as, in some ways, like a founder support group, a group of about 8 other founders who had started a company around the same time. And we were just sharing, we thought was going to be just, work best practices, right? And it very quickly turned into just like life best practices or life situations. And people have gone through, life tragedies, divorces, family suicides, companies that have closed down, just the whole gamut of situations that are really incredibly stressful, but ultimately impact your ability to be really effective on the job. And I think that learning for me has been a willingness to actually have those conversations and be real with others so that you can be real with yourself and you can actually hold yourself to the things you care most about. And so, I wish that I had learned that earlier in my career, that so much of my success actually is a function of practicing these habits, developing these habits.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And let's switch gears here a little bit, talk about more like the industry that you are in, the mental health care industry and its trends. And back in 2011, when you founded Ginger, to put it simple, it was a time in that was the mental health care was not so much like a thing in 2011. The pandemic has changed the narrative, and mental health is now considered a critical part of the core healthcare today. And thinking about that in your product, can you give us insight as what's been like to work at a company that has experienced such a tremendous growth over the past few years?
It's hard. It's really hard. I think there's the pre-COVID story, there's the COVID story. I want to say that mental health has made it into the forefront. I think we're on that journey now. We're having these conversations. We're having these conversations in these kinds of rooms, in government, in boardrooms, and in other settings that historically would never have been, in the dialogue. So we've come a long way, and there's still just a whole lot more we've got to do. But yet, 10 years ago, there was no digital health industry. There was no digital mental health industry. And when we first started, there was, a lot of no, a lot of not now, a lot of this is impossible. And like it's true for so many things, it takes resilience. It takes being good at getting back up again. And I think that's true again. I mean, that's still true today, right? I'm sure many of you in the audience here are pursuing this. When we talk about mental health, I mean, it's like talking about physical health, right? It's an incredibly massive, huge need. And so no one company, no one person is going to solve this challenge, right? And that was true 10 years ago, and it's especially true now where 1 billion people worldwide are in need of care. COVID has just happened or is happening, and the collective trauma that we've all experienced is real. And so that has only gotten worse, unfortunately, not better. And so I think the opportunity that all of us have to really, make an impact is even more pronounced. So, we started the journey originally coming out of research we were doing at MIT at the time, leveraging data we could use, we can collect passively to really basically predict when someone, a patient, a member, was having a symptom flare. And, I've gone through a couple of pivots over the years. The first pivot was this business model pivot, which was, in effect, we used to sell to provider groups, basically sell to other hospitals and clinics, this technology platform we had built, and eventually we realized that we had to become one. That the only way to solve a broken system was to really rewire the whole machine from soup to nuts, was to recruit a provider group that was actually reflective of the populations we were trying to serve. It was building a business model that allowed for product innovation versus just fee-for-service medicine. It was changing a few of these variables that allowed us to then create an experience that ultimately members or individuals really needed, which just in the existing system wasn't going to get created.
Mm-hmm. And just following up on that, like talking about the difficulties that you had along the way, we are seeing this today, like Facebook laid off 11,000 employees. And this seems to be like a trend right now with the current situation of the economy. Companies are being forced to lay off employees and cut costs. Do you have any particular top of mind relevant examples of challenges that you can share with us besides those ones, but as an entrepreneur and along the way that you were managing Ginger? And how did you eventually overcome those situations?
Yeah, it's gonna be a challenging year. There's no doubt, and a challenging 18 to 24 months. And certainly these are kind of the first signs, or maybe ongoing signs of that. I think for me, the saving grace to some degree is like incredible companies, incredible like products and experiences get built in these situations. We felt that coming out of getting into at the time I was in business school in 2009 and saw just a meaningful and real downturn. And when people go through those environments, they start to question what they're working on, what they care about. And so I think there's a huge reshifting of workforce and labor into problems that matter. And I think that's in some way a benefit to what might be going on right now, as painful and as challenging as it is, and it has been, given COVID, given inflation, given all of these macro scenarios. I think there's also an incredible amount of innovation that's happening right now, right? And there's an incredible amount of people who are willing to take a risk. And so, we've had to see that over the course of Ginger. When we first made that business model pivot, we actually had to go through a round of layoffs and change and really retool the leadership team and our whole team, which was hard. It's hard again, right? And doing that in a way that's compassionate, in a way that actually cares for people, but allows you to still stay true to your mission. Those are tough decisions to make. But if I think the looking back, it was the right decision that we made to change that business model, actually retool the team to really tackle this problem in the way that we've now fashioned it. And so, I think it's going to be challenging over the next 18 to 24 months. But I guess the flip side of it is also we've had an internal mantra right now around mindful entrepreneurship and mindful spending, and the idea that in times like this, you actually do question where you're making investments, and you really start to double down and investigate and figure out what's the kernel, what's the nugget, what is going to be most valuable to invest in, and you really adopt a model of essentialism, right? Less but better. And I think that's what this is about. It's subtraction, so you can focus on the things that really do matter most and are ultimately going to give you the impact you're looking to achieve.
Thanks for sharing, Karan. That's definitely insightful. I know that there's obviously risk and reward that comes with being a founder, some of which you already spoke to right now. But I think there's particularly something interesting about being a leader of a mental health care company, because there's a challenge that comes with an accountability of the fact that the company actually practices what it preaches. As Dean Harrison mentioned, you are the COO currently of Headspace Health. As the COO, how do you ensure that your employees' well-being and mental well-being is maintained?
Yeah, I used to, when we first started, I used to always talk about how it almost felt inconsistent with our mission to be a mental health startup, because as a startup, you're going through the grind, or what feels like the grind, right? And I didn't realize just how true that was, right? and managing a virtual first largely company now during COVID has been hard. I mean, it's been hard on so many people, but I think there's a few things that we've been able to do that have helped a lot. One is just there's no replacement for space, time. Again, going back to that less but better sort of philosophy, we have something we have called Mind Days, where once every other week we have Fridays in effect off, allow people to just create the space they need to invest in the things oftentimes outside of work. We start many meetings with a mindful moment or even a mindful meditation, which has been an incredible reset just to get people centered before they start. If they're in back-to-back Zooms, one session after the other, that's been a really helpful way to maintain some level of, again, space. We focus on making sure we invest in mental health benefits. And so making sure that our teams have access to high-quality mental health care as well as physical health care. And that's a really critical part of the equation. And then I think community and connection is also a huge part of creating a safe environment and really focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging more than anything else. The B, I think, is something that I think I've learned over the years, just how critical that can be and how critical that is actually to your mental health. And so we spend a lot of time and energy thinking about how do we support different populations, because their needs are going to be different, right? And so whether it's through employee resource groups or whether it's by finding other mentors that can support our communities of color and other teammates. It's really continuing to invest in that. And I'll say we haven't gotten it all right, but the thing that we do often is just collecting feedback and listening to and adapting, because we're now we're not by any means in a post-COVID world, but we are in kind of a new phase of that, and so we're now learning to adapt and create kind of benefits and experiences for our teams that can make them most effective. I see the last piece of this that's actually been really helpful from an operational standpoint is actually very tight goal setting, like being really explicit about not more, but less, not harder, but easier, right? Not adding resources, but figuring out ways to subtract them. And I know my mental model in the early days was it was the opposite of all those things, which just made this all that much harder. And you realize when you look back, it's what's the shorter version of that email that the person receiving it might be able to actually respond to in a faster way. It allows them to get back to their family, right? Is this actually an hour-long meeting, or is it a, minute-long email, right? Or modes of communication. There's all of these ways where you can start to create just a more sustainable work environment, right? And I think back to my days in consulting or otherwise, I was programmed, I can't speak for all of us, but I know I felt like I had been programmed that you had to do more and you had to run through the grind, and that was success. And it's just not. And I realized, looking back, if I actually constrained the problem, gave it some time, but gave myself time outside of that work to be more effective, I was going to be far better at the time I was spending at the job.
That's great. I think it's definitely refreshing to hear that Headspace Health promotes a culture that really serves the diverse populations. I can say for a fact that that's not what we see in most companies. So it's really refreshing to hear that. Thank you for sharing. So here at Haas, we really care about diversity and in this case, the intersection of healthcare and diversity. And we're always looking to learn how to design products and services with an equity-focused lens. As a fellow South Asian and person of color, I assume you are aware of the cultural challenges that come with, maybe serving populations that are not as willing to accept or acknowledge mental health solutions. And so to that end, I'm just wondering, have you in your career so far encountered those challenges? Sure you have. And if that's the case, how have you overcome those challenges to be really able to serve diverse populations, especially when we think about some of those cultural barriers and serving different geographies?
I think there's kind of a few dimensions to that question. So what's really fascinating, actually, one of the first thought that's coming to mind is when COVID started to hit in February, or when we started to see it show up in the conversations people were having with their coaches and their clinicians. They use different language to describe it, right? They might have used their native tongue. They might have described kind of different scenarios, but there was a commonality across all of them, which was to say workplace stress, relationship issues, sleep, anxiety. Those are the top 4 or 5, no matter geography, no matter the day of the week, month of the year, that have persisted, that were true in Italy, in Japan, in Brazil, in the United States. And obviously we don't have representative data across the globe, but what we found was that there was actually a lot of consistency, and you actually have to tailor the experience to meet those specific needs, right? And so the core fundamental issues that people were experiencing were universal around mental health challenges, but you couldn't create a one-size-fits-all solution. And what that meant was you had to recruit a provider group that reflected the population you served, so making sure we had coaches and clinicians that came from the communities that we were trying to support. It meant recruiting a product design, engineering, operations team that can represent and understand those populations. It meant especially recruiting a marketing and communications group that could speak to the different variations in each of those different regions. And so I think that's one way we've done it, is both from a recruitment standpoint, thinking about ways where we can actually recruit from the populations we're looking to serve so we can serve them more effectively. I think there's another aspect of the question, which is there are just certain populations for whom it's much harder to get care. And I shared the example, certainly in India and a lot of South Asian communities where, again, it's just the no-go zone. You just don't talk about it. People shut down. And I didn't realize that wasn't even a thing that was happening at the time. And I look back and now I see it's exactly what was happening. And as a result, you don't seek access to care, and things get far more pronounced than they should, far more chronic than they should. And so prevention is a huge part of, I think, the solution, and something that we've really focused on through meditation and coaching and content services, which are easier for a lot of communities, but again, especially places where there's a high stigma, that it's much easier to talk about something like sleep than it is to talk about something like depression or bipolar disorder, right? And so those are more approachable on-ramps for those populations to really start to engage. But then once they engage, getting them, if they need clinical care, getting them that care as fast as they can. And so figuring out ways to reduce the stigma in those populations, I think, is a big part. And then I'd say the last piece of our strategy, and it's something that I'd say, in full transparency, we're evolving and trying to get better at, is getting better data about what works for whom, when, and how. Because we know there are going to be some differences in the way that we treat or support different populations. And so we need to be able to measure that and understand it, have that feedback into the product development cycle, and then tweak the product then. And by product, I mean the combination of the technology and the care providers to really be able to then deliver on that experience. And we may discover that there are certain populations for whom we're actually not a great fit. We don't do a good job. And if that's true, it's our duty to really find other groups who may be building very specific targeted solutions for those populations that can get them the support they need. They can figure out how to remove the friction that they need. So I'm hopeful, because I think technology in particular and a lot of these solutions are increasingly focused on ways to remove friction. And from so many of these communities, there's just a lot of friction.
Amazing. Let's continue talking about challenges, but now let's talk about challenges that come with a merge.
With a merger? Okay.
Yeah. Ginger and Headspace merger, it's one of the most exciting ones that happened, and creates new opportunities for the two companies to deliver additive value to the existing users and for the future ones as well. What do you think are the challenges that you and your leadership are facing with this merger? And what do you think are the victories that have occurred because of this merger?
Victories, I like that. I wouldn't go that far yet. I would say, as is often the case, it's almost always about the people. And so I think the hard thing is merging two teams means, merging two groups of people. And I think that the fortunate part about the Ginger and Headspace merger had been, there were sort of two cultures and two sets of values that were very similar, very consistent. So that has made kind of overarching this far easier. But, it's landing different teams, combining different groups. That's hard. That you got to work through the specifics. There's a lot of details to work out. And so we were in the messy middle for some time as we've been working to try to bring those two teams together and realize the promise of the vision. But I'd say we're getting out on the other side here, and first step in that has actually really just been creating a unified experience from prevention in the form of meditation, mindfulness content, and behavioral health coaching, all the way into clinical care in the form of therapy and psychiatry services. So having a full spectrum that people can actually move between or move amongst in a seamless or frictionless way as possible is a big part of the solution. I think the industrial logic of the merger was really, when we first made the pivot for Ginger from selling to providers to becoming one, we talked about the 3 C's: coaching, clinical, and content. Pick 2 out of 3, meaning you can't do all the things. And we largely picked coaching and clinical services, kind of the people aspect of mental health care. And when we looked around, the ecosystem, the Headspace team had built this incredible content, this incredible stigma-free brand and experience that was accessible by hundreds of millions of people around the world. And so bringing the two together actually allowed us to create this fully comprehensive experience that went from prevention, that lower lift, stigma-free experience, all the way to clinical care. And so I'd say that's as close to the victory category as I'd put it, which is to say we've built that member experience, and we've learned a lot. We had a number of shared customers. We've rolled out to a number of large employers. We've rolled out to a number of large health plans. Kaiser Permanente here in our backyard, incredibly exciting. We got a chance to roll out nationwide to all 12 million members across Kaiser, which has been a huge opportunity to unlock access to care to many people and really realize this vision of Headspace Health, which is this comprehensive mental health solution. So, I think we're on the first, I guess now it's the second year of a multi-year journey to realize that. And I think we're starting to discover just how much opportunity and how much need there is, because there's, as I'm sure many of you in the audience know, right, over the course of the last 2 years in particular, the need is almost doubled. I mean, it's more than doubled in certain groups, and especially in kind of teens and adolescent populations. It's gone even higher than that. So we're on that journey. I think we've been learning a lot, and we've got both some lessons learned as well as I think some early momentum around that.
And one last question, like in the role that you are in right now, what excites you more like for the future? What do you think is the future for this industry for the next 10 years, 15 years?
I'd say looking at all of you. Seriously, I mean, this is a pretty lonely stage. There was no stage back in the day. And you couldn't talk about mental health, right? You didn't pitch mental health to venture firms. You didn't talk about it in school. You certainly didn't talk about it at your job. And I think that's starting to change. So I'd say I'm hopeful for the level of investment that has come in recent years. I think there's a catch-up factor. There was so much disinvestment or underinvestment for so many years that now people are actually recognizing just how impactful mental health can be on physical health, can be on, economic productivity, can be on so many of these like fundamental foundational goals that we have as a society. So I think there's a lot of investment, like pure dollars that are coming in. I think there's a lot of new talent that's coming into this space that gives me a lot of hope. I think we're starting to see some meaningful innovations. I think we've seen a lot of noise over the last few years that's sometimes made it hard to figure out, well, what's real and what's not. How do people, I think it's a space where you can't be fast and loose, right? You're taking care of really challenging situations for people, and privacy and security and quality, high quality care are just so critical, right? And so I think you're seeing signs that people are making investments in that core infrastructure to really create great products and experiences. So I'm excited. I mean, this feels like, one of the defining challenges of our generation. And I think that we're actually starting to make investments that represent that. And I think we're going to start to see what works for whom, when, and how, right? Like we have a version and a vision for what that could look like at Headspace Health. But I think there's going to be a whole host of solutions that are going to start to get created that hopefully we can partner with, that we can refer out to, that we can point people to, that are going to start to meet that need. And I think that's super exciting, because when we talk about mental health, it's more than just sitting on a couch seeing a therapist, right? And that's sort of been the de facto, like what people think of, when really it's this huge spectrum of solutions and need that we're just scratching the surface around, and we're going to start to actually have, I think, a dramatic impact across society. So
that's amazing. I think we can jump to Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. So we now have the opportunity to hear from you, the audience. If you want to go to the back of the room, there's a microphone there. And if you could just identify yourself and then ask your question, that would be really wonderful.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. My name is Vanessa, and I'm an undergrad student at Berkeley. So I'm wondering, do you believe that in the future of mental health, will it be solely solved through digital solutions, which is kind of what we're seeing right now? Or do you think that we'll eventually have to marry the bits and atoms and really involve in-person human connection?
Vanessa, great question. How many other undergrads are in the audience? I'm curious. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Starting early. I know that was a leading question, and I'm with you. Technology is not the panacea here, right? Like, it's not in and of itself the solution, and it can't be. But what technology can do is start to solve just a fundamental supply and demand imbalance. Because the reality is there's just not enough providers out there. And if you look at the training programs, you look at the universities, you look at the schools, they're not creating enough therapists or certainly not enough psychiatrists to meet the need, right? And so I think that the solution here is not an either or, it's an and. And it's technology combined, virtual solutions or virtual first solutions for a certain portion of the population for whom in-person isn't, or for whom virtual is appropriate. But there's a subset of the population that actually needs to be able to meet in person. They might even need inpatient hospitalizations or any sort of more chronic and intensive care, in which case you absolutely need it. So I think we've often gotten lost in like the wrong conversation, which is like, which one? And I think what you're highlighting is it's a both, right? And there's no replacement for the human connection. And there's not enough people, so we got to figure out ways for them to have the scale they need and for us to think about other kinds of care. Like 7 years ago when we started, behavioral health coaching, that was a foreign concept, right? People said that's illegal, not okay, not allowed. But it turned out in physical health, you had nurse practitioners, you had physician assistants, you had all these clinician extenders that were actually doing an incredible job that allowed the clinician or the physician to do what they did best, practice at the top of their license, right? And it's the same, that's when you think about solutions in this space, it's thinking about it from a systems lens and thinking about, well, what's the combination of things that need to come together? What part can I play and what part should others play to help solve this? So I'm really hopeful, and I think that there's some really incredible innovation that's also happening in in-person treatment to make those experiences actually far more member-first, member-friendly.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa.
Hi, I'm also an undergrad. My name's Carissa Pham. That was a fantastic question, Vanessa, because that was also mine. Um, but along the same lines, I think that mental health often isn't addressed because it's not seen. Like a broken leg, you can see. Yep. So how are ways that you're drawing insights from the data that you're gathering to show that mental health is actually prevalent and needs to be addressed in all the different geographies, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, it doesn't start. So the challenge in the space, right, is that we've used survey tools, right, like the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7 that were originally developed by pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer in this case, really to justify the endpoints for their pharmaceutical agents, right, their drugs, simply, right. They weren't intended as a diagnostic or as a screening tool, and so. You can identify the need actually in lots of really interesting ways. I mean, we see it in the ways in which people might engage with the app, the frequency, the duration, the content of conversations they might be having with a coach that are actually triggers for them potentially needing more acute care. And so I think it's thinking about all the different sources of quote unquote demand, right, of where mental health can present, and not in traditional ways. It might be in a physician's office where, according now to the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, you're required to, or you will be required to screen for anxiety and depression as part of general primary care treatment. So that's going to be a really powerful way. But the challenge is you're going to discover all this need, and then what? Where do you send them? You're going to wait in line for months, not even weeks, months, as I'm sure many of you know, to seek access to care. And so, I think that there are unique data sources you can start to tap into that can identify need. But I think so much of this comes down to just reducing the stigma and allowing people who may not even know they have mental health issues to get some sort of help, whatever that might look like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from B School, MBA. Basically, my question is related to the concept of profit maximization that we are all thought of. That is something that we are all very fond of by Falby now. But mental health being a basic human right in the world, like how do you see these companies coming, basically using tech as a source and then data and then building tools on top of it so that we all get. But the idea is only privileged people are getting the access, but there are like so many people who are not getting the access of this. Is there any way where you, because you have been living in this industry from 10 years, what do you think, what are the other ways where you can build tools for people who have who doesn't have access to these kind of things, especially developing nations?
What was your name?
This is Tarun.
Tarun, nice to meet you, Tarun.
Thank you.
So I think there was a couple parts to your question. So one is, for companies or for let's say businesses who are profit maximizing, their most important asset is their people, right? And for far too long, they've underinvested in mental health resources for their employees. And so, one powerful force in this are employers, particularly self-insured employers who pay for health insurance for their teams, to really buy solutions that allow their teams to get access to high quality care, because traditional health plans have limited access, right? And so I think that's a really powerful kind of mechanism to start to generate the kind of change that we need. The second I think you're describing is how can governments and or other bodies actually play a role in unlocking access, especially for communities who can't afford it otherwise, right? Medicaid in this country and or other populations, abroad. And I think the challenge there is right now, cost of care is going up, not down, which means for those of you who, as in your profit maximizing course, will know, right, that the number of people you can serve is going to drop as a result. So the focus has to be on supply side innovation, has to be on figuring out ways to pull costs out of the system, unlock access, and reserve the expensive resources to those that actually need that level of care. And so I think its solutions and technology can certainly play a really critical role in dropping that cost per covered life, really, right? Or cost per engaged member. If you can catch them early, if you can catch them in a preventative context, you may not need 8 to 12 courses of treatment. Maybe you need a 5-minute meditation. Maybe you need, any number of a conversation for a half hour with a behavioral health coach, right? There's a, obviously I gave the Headspace examples, but there's lots of other examples of solutions that actually allow us to solve this at a systems level.
Thank you. Is there anything Headspace is trying to do in this route to make sure that the access to mental health will be served to people who doesn't have even, privilege?
Yeah, no, I think it's sort of, I think, foundational to how we think of the world. I mean, our mission and our vision is a world where everyone can be kind to their mind, and everyone means everyone. And so that's taken the form of giving away access to healthcare providers, to teachers, to specific communities we know were in particular need. It's including increasingly working with government payers to actually cover the cost of some of the care that we're delivering, and we're going to continue to go down that path. So it's something that we know we can't do alone, to be clear. We're going to help support from our specific lens, but again, we're looking to partner, and I'm hopeful that more and more people are going to start to support and target those populations because there's such a massive need.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Karan. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Alina, the second-year MBA exchange student. Can you please share your view on experiential medicine, and do you think it will take bigger piece in their treatment over the drug medicine that we currently used to have? And do you believe that such technology as gaming, VR, AI will actually develop this and will change the way how we approach the healthcare, both mental health care and just the regular health care?
Yeah, great question. I'm very bullish on it long term. I think there's no doubt that these sorts of solutions are going to be a part of what changes the equation here, right? And virtual reality therapy or exposure therapy, for instance, for specific targeted use cases are already showing an incredible amount of clinically validated data, right? And so there's no doubt that I think that's going to be true. I think the challenge is going to be figuring out what's the right economic models or what's the right payment models to actually support those sorts of innovations, because traditionally most of medicine is still fee for service and you're paying per transaction or per visit, and those visits aren't considered a visit. And so I think it's going to be increasingly companies like us and others that are focused on ultimately value and value-based care that actually are really interested in potentially offering those kinds of solutions to members. If it gets them better, and we know and we can prove that it gets them better and we can do it in a cost-effective way, that's fantastic. I think the challenge right now is that most plans, health plans in particular, where most of mental health is paid for, don't operate in a value-based care environment. So they're not incented to really roll those kinds of tools out there. But as we start to develop more evidence of the success of not only the clinical efficacy, but the economic efficacy or ultimately the cost savings that could result from that, we'll start to see some significant adoption.
Great, thank you. What timeline do you think we are talking here? Is it 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, 20-year?
Don't ask me that. I'm not good with time. I know it will happen. It's just a question of when. No, I think I think it's going to take longer than all of us would like.
Oh, no.
Seriously. And so I actually think, just as a PSA for everyone in this audience, it's going to take you longer than you'd like to do the thing that you want to do. In healthcare, that's been true, and especially in mental health care. Even if you can't take the last 2 years and extrapolate that out, right? You've got to extend the timeline. So you play the long game. But if you play the long game and you're willing to do that, and you're willing to go deep and invest in relationships and find incredible people and actually really understand and study this space, it's going to happen. And it's just a question of, can you figure out the right sequence and the right order to be able to do that? So I'm hopeful. You just have to have enough in the tank to survive until you can thrive.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Karen. My name is Kai. I'm an MBA student here. So a lot of digital health companies have been struggling in the past year, especially after they go public, like Teladoc and Haas and Hers Mental Health, American Well. They had a bad first half of 2022, and So, I'm just wondering, what's your playbook, I mean, post-pandemic playbook, to navigate those challenges? And another thing I'd like to ask is, how do you influence the government to decrease the restrictions on regulatory for digital health? I know Biden administration has been trying to do something, but it's still far from desirable. So I'd like to hear your strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, two big questions. I'll go backwards. So I'd say we're moving in the right direction. For mental health to be a part of, a number of now pretty large presidential speeches is meaningful, and it's insufficient. I think there's far more that we need to do here. And I think a lot of it has to do with payment model reform, payment model innovation. And the more we can start to pay for alternative forms of treatment, right? Not just a visit, but continuous outside of clinic care and these other tools or these other solutions, the more we're going to create product innovation. Like that product innovation follows business model innovation. And so that's something that I think we're really excited about and continuing to advocate for, and as part of a variety of other groups that are thinking about ways to do that. I think the other big one, particularly in mental health care, is just the challenging licensing regulations, state-by-state licensing regulations, which in effect trap supply or clinical supply in states that may have excess and not in states that don't. And so we've got to find a way to fix that problem. So I'm hopeful. That's going to take longer, I think, than all of us would like. But I think we're moving in the right direction. We're starting to see some signs that some of these payment model innovations, in particular, that health plans are starting to compensate for these sorts of solutions, can actually bear real fruit and can show that you can actually bend the cost curve. And as soon as you start to do that, things start to get adopted much faster. And I think that almost ties to the first question or first topic, which is, it's hard. I think expectations were inflated, and you've got to really be able to set realistic targets. You've got to have sound business fundamentals. There's no replacement for strong unit economics, right? If your unit economics don't work, don't pour a lot of cash on the system, right? Because you're not going to actually produce a lot of ultimately profit you can plow back into the model. So I think some of that is sort of people peeling back the layers and starting to look and see, okay, well, what were the unit economics in this business? Were they largely really just driven by a whole lot of top of funnel marketing, or is it really fundamentally some sort of product innovation that's actually driving a sustainable competitive advantage? And I will say, like, the flip side of this is it's incredible that we have a number of digital health public companies, right? Again, most companies in the past were largely biotechnology or other firms. There wasn't care or service delivery or tech-enabled service deliveries companies that have actually gone public. So I think they're blazing the trail, and I'm hopeful they're going to continue to attract more and more capital into the space.
We have time for one last question.
Oh my God, stress. Hi, Karan. My name is Molisha. I'm an undergrad student at Haas. Thank you so much for your time, first of all. I actually have a two-part question surrounding making intentional choices. What I've kind of noticed as an undergrad is society has this set rhetoric of kind of what success looks like, and we're kind of conditioned to believe that's what we want. So the first part of my question is, how did you differentiate what you wanted versus what was expected of you? I mean, having gone through the 5 years of consulting and then realizing, looking back now, are there any frameworks that you would kind of impart on us to be able to better navigate that decision? And then the second question that I had was, how did you navigate the ambiguity and like the risks involved with entering a space that at that time hadn't been disrupted yet, and kind of weigh like the stability that you had in your life with this motivation and desire to want to do something different? Because yes, impulse is important, but then with these things you have to be very calculated about whether something's going to be feasible, because it is like your life that is going to change. So
no big deal. Those are two incredible questions. We could probably spend the whole hour talking about that. There are two books that were really influential in my life that came to mind as you were talking about the first and the second. The first is Measure of a Man, Measure of a Person. It's by Sidney Poitier, who was the first African-American to win an Academy Award. And the whole book was really about how we're conditioned to measure ourselves against what others think of us. And the key to happiness, in his words, was to measure yourself against yourself. Just do you. Focus on you first. And I just did not understand that. And for so long, and especially for, I'm sure, I mean, if you're in this room, you probably have some elements of this achiever mentality. Like, you're constantly measuring yourself against other people's rubric, and you're always going to lose that game. There's always going to be someone who's done it faster, better, in a more impactful way. And I just realized that I was just not, if I kept doing that, I was never going to be happy. And so I spent time. I did this exercise. It's called In My Perfect World. And it was basically from a personal, family, and work. Like, what did I want? What did it look like? What did it feel like? What did it tangibly, like, when I woke up in the day, what did my day look like, or my week or my month look like? And then I could fashion, my work to reflect that. The second part of your question was, there's a book called The Power of Regret by Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called Drive about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And one of the main kind of themes in this book was, I forgot what he calls it, like the boldness regret. The idea that most people's, two biggest regrets are connection, like to other people, and boldness. You didn't take the leap you thought you could. And I think so many people, especially in business school and graduate school, but to some degree in undergrad, I kind of felt like I had to do the same thing. I had to hop into consulting because that's what people did. And I didn't really think about, well, what do I really want? Like, what gives me purpose? What gives me a sense of understanding? And focus on that, and then craft a world around that. And that's not easy. Didn't have a nest egg. There's real risk around that. Starting a company without a nest egg meant I didn't have a fallback plan. And so that's really hard, and it takes a toll, but I couldn't shake it. I knew even if I didn't do this, I'd be doing this. And so I ultimately realized, like, this was the path for me, and it's not for everyone, but two good books that might give some frameworks that could be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So that concludes our evening. We really want to thank you, Karan, and our student moderators for a really insightful and powerful evening. We also want to thank you, Michael Martin, for making this evening possible. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.